It looks like we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to RANE's weekly Facebook Live. My name is Adriano Bossoni. I am RANE's Director of Analysis. And today with me is my colleague, Matteo Ilardo, one of our main Europe analysts. And today we will be discussing something that is making a lot of headlines these days. Over the past few days, there have been lots of incidents at the border between Belarus and Poland, with the Polish government saying that a few helicopters from Belarus had entered the Polish airspace, with also stories about members of the mercenary Wagner group actually moving close to the border between Belarus and Poland. And then we have also seen lots of developments in Romania, which is another EU and NATO member state that is heavily worried about all things Russia. As people watching us probably know, the Russians have been attacking Ukrainian targets on the Ukrainian side of the Danube River. The thing is, the Danube River is one of the borders between Ukraine and Romania. So the Romanians are very, very worried that the action is taking place only meters, literally, from the Romanian territory. So to discuss all these things, I'm here with Matteo. We've been talking about this at RANE, and we've been having lots of client questions for many days now. So we thought it would be a good idea to talk about this today. So Matteo, let's start with a foundational conversation. Let's just talk about why Poland and why Romania. Why do they matter so much for NATO, for the EU? Why they are so sensible about all things Russia? You want to start with Poland, the one on the Baltic Sea, and then we move to the Black Sea. Why does Poland matter?
Yeah, well, let's say that Poland, just like all countries bordering Russia in Eastern Europe, Romania in the south, Poland more in the north, the Baltic countries as well, north of Poland, they basically represent that buffer in between Europe and basically Russia and the former Soviet bloc that basically represents what Russia sees as its own strategic depth. Basically, what Russia sees as a fundamental piece of land, basically, where Russia would eventually go on defending eventual invasions coming from Western Europe. Let's remind, just looking at the geography of the Eurasian continent, we see how a lack of mountains from the westernmost border of Russia and the rest of Europe create no geographical natural barrier for Russia to shield behind. So basically creates a flat plain in which invasions can go deeper into Russia. This is also one of the reasons why Russia, among the many reasons why we could say Russia decided to eventually invade Ukraine, is also because even Ukraine is seen as one of such fundamental buffers. So,
no, and to add to what you were saying, if you take a look at Poland's history, it has been invaded, partitioned, attacked so many times. In some cases from the west, but in many other cases from the east, right? So this explains why they are so sensible to all things involving Russia, why they are so loud in their support for EU sanctions against Russia, why they are so supportive of Ukraine's war efforts, why they want a greater NATO presence in Central and Eastern Europe, right? For Poland, protection against a potential Russian aggression is basically the cornerstone of their foreign policy, right? Romania is the other player in this story. It shares some of Poland's concerns when it comes to Russia, even though Romania doesn't technically share a land border with Russia. They are present at the Black Sea, where Russia is very present, especially since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Romania borders Moldova, which is a country that has a pro-Russia breakaway territory that hosts Russian troops. So they are also very, very sensitive to everything that Russia does. Maybe not to the same extent as Poland, in the sense that Romania does not share the same history of invasion and partition, but they care a lot and they worry a lot, and this is why they are also very vocal NATO supporters, very vocal supporters of sanctions, a very tough position by the EU, by NATO, by the United States on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the thing is, over the past few days, both countries have been particularly worried about what Russia is doing. Let's start with Poland, which is possibly the more high risk case of the two.
Yeah, basically, Poland, as you said, not only does it see Russia as an existential threat and everything Russia related as an existential threat, it also is one of the most, not just the most vocal, but also one of the most active supporter of Ukraine. It ranks third just behind the UK and the US when it comes to actual financial and military support to Ukraine. So it's a key country in the overall conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and the Europe participation basically in the conflict indirectly. So what's happening right now is that we saw at the border, as you were mentioning at the beginning, some crossings via helicopter from Belarusian troops, but at the same time we also see how Wagner presence has increasingly raised tensions in Poland. And at the border we saw also migrants basically coming at the fenced border. We saw footage showing even some stun grenades being thrown from the borders onto Polish troops. So the situation clearly is tense, and Poland has reacted with a military buildup, basically enforcing a presence at the border, which also increases the escalatory risk. Of course, we see how this can easily trigger security dynamic where both parts basically increase military presence and tensions only rise from there.
And I would say that the escalatory risk is particularly high in the sense of if there is a Wagner incursion into Polish territory, if there is an incursion by the Belarusian military into Polish territory, it would not be an accident. It would be an explicit decision by Wagner, by Minsk, by Moscow, maybe by all three of them, to actually do this. They can't claim it was an accident. Last year, when there was this missile hitting Polish territory and killing 2 people, there was this speculation: was it intentional or was it an accident? Apparently, most investigations say that it was actually a Ukrainian missile hitting a Polish target by mistake. But the thing is, if there is an incursion, it would not be an accident. It would not be a missile or a rocket hitting the wrong target. It would be a proper decision. So if it does happen, and we're getting lots of client questions about this, the reaction politically and diplomatically will be very vocal. Poland would denounce this as an act of aggression. There would be consultations with NATO, invoking Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which calls member states for consultation when a potential aggression takes place. There may even be Article 5 conversations. Article 5 is the collective defense clause that means that an attack against one member of the alliance is an attack against all of them. So there may even be Article 5 conversations. But I would argue, Matteo, let me know if you think otherwise, but I would argue that if the incursion is small in scope and scale, such as a group of Wagner mercenaries entering terrorizing a Polish village for a few hours and then coming back to the Belarusian side of the border, I would say that NATO would push for de-escalation, even if the criticism, the denouncing is very loud and very vocal, diplomatically, politically. I don't think NATO wants a war with Russia, and I don't think that a small incursion, however problematic it could be, would trigger a war between Russia and NATO, because both sides would want to de-escalate. But the thing is, as you said before, with so many Polish troops now on the border, the risk of a confrontation is relatively high. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. The main risk comes from potential military engagement with troops, which can even just happen by accident, simply because the increased presence of troops there increases the chances of this to happen. But yeah, I agree with you that I think, and also the incident that we talked about that happened in November with the missile striking the village in Poland shows how both Poland and NATO tend to be cautious when push comes to shove. Basically, beyond rhetorics, they tend to be cautious in these cases. They don't want escalation. At the same time, Wagner, on the one hand, offers Russia plausible deniability, meaning that it's not properly a state actor. It's a private mercenary group that can be argued acts somewhat independently from the Kremlin, especially after the chaos we saw with the attempted coup a few months ago. So in that case, we could also have a situation in which both sides can actually make a distinction between Wagner and Russia with the goal in mind of not escalating. At the same time, exactly because of this, the situation is also complicated, because Wagner may, at a certain point, just decides to act on its own. We know how the situation in Russia is very complex. If Wagner feels unsafe, if the situation becomes even more chaotic in Russia, we don't exactly 100% know what Wagner would do. So Wagner itself may seek incidents to create escalatory tensions.
We need to keep in mind that NATO has gone to war with non-state actors, right? When the war against the Taliban took place 2 decades ago. But I agree with you, it would be a political decision whether or not to escalate this to that point. And then we have the situation in Romania, which is not as critical. This is similar to the incident you described about the missile hitting the Polish territory, right? Russia is targeting Ukrainian targets on the Ukrainian side of the Danube, but the distance with Romania is so small that it's entirely possible that a missile falls on the Ukrainian side, on the Romanian side, sorry, which would be, technically speaking, an act of aggression. But I think that in this case, the chances of this being an accident are much higher, and the chances of Romania and the rest of NATO understanding that this was indeed an accident would be much, much higher. So the room for de-escalation would be much bigger, in the sense of, I insist, similar to what we described before, there would probably be Article 4 consultations, there would probably be emergency meetings between all the NATO member states, there would probably be very loud and very vocal statements of condemnation, especially if some Romanian lives are lost because of the incident. But at the end of the day, hopefully, this is not the kind of events that triggers a full-on war between NATO and Russia. I think that both sides would like to de-escalate the situation. NATO doesn't want a war with Russia. Russia doesn't want a war with NATO. But both cases, and it's probably Poland a bit more than Romania, both cases mean that the risk of a crisis is there. It could happen any minute now. So the fact that we think that it's in the common interest to de-escalate doesn't necessarily mean that the crisis will not happen, that the crisis would not spiral out of control, right?
Definitely, yeah. And the risk is rising, on the one hand, for how tense the situation is in Poland, on the other hand, for how the border between Ukraine and Romania is now a flashpoint because of the whole story that we talked about in our publications with, the grain deal in the Black Sea collapsing, now the Danube becoming a new fundamental supply line for Ukraine grain. So Russia pounding infrastructure on the river, therefore the risk for incidents increasing. But as you said, the appetite for escalation is even lower in Romania. So the situation is such that hopefully we won't see the situation of escalation happening either by accident or by design.
So I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. But it was very nice talking with you about geopolitics as always. People watching this live or at some other point, you can always find about our geopolitical intelligence solutions and offers at ranenetwork.com. We invite everyone watching us to join that link and see what they find, and we hope that they like what they find. And yeah, Matteo, as always, a pleasure talking with you. See you next time. Everyone watching, have a wonderful weekend.